everyone, it's Channin here for Pinkfresh Studio. In today's video, we're going to create this fun modern floral card featuring the wonderful in every way stamps, dies, and stencils. We're going to start with Wonderful in Every Way stamp set. This is a really beautiful little set that comes with that gorgeous floral image and several sentiments. I'm going to stamp this image over an A2 panel of white cardstock, and I'm going to ink it up in warm buff. I will eventually stamp over this with a black, the detail black, but warm buff dries really quickly as opposed to the detail black, which takes a little bit longer to dry, and I want to start ink blending as soon as I'm done stamping these flowers. I stamped 2 panels with this floral image because we're going to create 2 different florals, one in pink and one in orange. And you do want to make sure you leave that stamp in your MISTI. Don't move it at all. We're going to come back and stamp it in that detail black after we do our ink blending. I have the stencils here, the Wonderful in Every Way stencil set. There are 5 stencils in this set. Each one are labeled, and I'm going to start with stencil 1 and work in order through these stencils. Once I've got the stencil in place, I've grabbed a couple pieces of tape to hold it down so it doesn't shift on me, and I'm going to start with the large and medium flower, just ink blending the openings to those flowers in this Raspberry Bliss, my dark pink of my combo for these flowers. Once I finish with the Raspberry Bliss, I'm going to move on to that little flower. We're going to start with Ballet Slipper and just ink blend a nice flat base layer of that beautiful light pink, and then we'll move on to Bubblegum, and now we're going to use this bubblegum to create a little gradation. I'm going to ink blend at the base of the flower, and that's going to create a little subtle gradation which will add some depth to that image. I've decided to go back to the Raspberry Bliss and just kind of darken up those openings in the large and medium flower, and that will complete stencil 1. Now moving on to stencil 2, I'm going to line this stencil up. Once I get it in place, I'll then grab a couple pieces of tape to just hold everything down, and we're going to start this time with Ballet Slipper, our light color, and just ink blend a nice flat base over the large and medium flower. When we're done with that, we're going to move on to Bubblegum and use this to create our gradation. I'm going to start with the medium flower and ink blend at the base of it to create a little subtle gradation there, just like how we did the small flower on the previous stencil. And then for the large flower, I'm going to ink blend at the center, creating a little gradation out. I am trying though to avoid the very center. I want to keep that as light as possible because I want to Copic color that center later. We're now on to stencil 3. I'm going to line this up and then grab some tape to hold everything in place. I'm going to start with Bubblegum this time, and we're going to ink blend a nice flat blend over all of the openings in this stencil. Once I finish with that, I'm going to move on to Raspberry Bliss. We're going to do a little bit of create some gradations here. Ink blend at the base of the small and medium flower, and then try to ink blend at the center of the large flower, again trying to avoid that very center because I want to color that later with the Copic. And I am able to angle my blending tool, and that's kind of how I can more precisely ink blend where I want. Now we're on to stencil 4, which is the first layer for the leaves. I'm going to start with Fresh Pear and just ink blend a nice flat base layer with this beautiful green. Then we're going to move on to Key Lime and ink blend a gradation at the base of the leaves where the leaves meet the stems and where they kind of meet up with the flowers. Once I finish that, we're going to change kind of the tone of these greens with this brown. This is warm buff again. We're just going to ink blend over all of the leaves with this brown color, a nice flat blend of this brown, and this is really going to change the tone of these leaves, really add kind of an earth tone color to it, and I just love the way that turned out. I love kind of layering my inks and creating new shades. Now we're on to stencil 5, line that up, and this stencil is a very easy layer. We're just going to ink blend this olive ink over all the openings. There's only one little area. There's a little stem that connects to the medium flower that has had no ink on it until this olive layer. So to kind of warm it up a little bit, I'm going to put down a little bit of that warm buff over that stem, and that will actually complete my pink flowers. Now we're ready to color that center. So I have my Copic marker here. This is R05, kind of a orangey red. I'm just going to color the very center of that flower, and now we're ready to stamp it in black. And so since we didn't move our stamp at all, it should line up perfectly with our flower or our paper as long as it's all lined up in the corner again. I just inked it up with detail black and stamped it, and I'm going to do it one more time just to make sure it's nice and bold and crisp, and stamp it one more time. And again, it'll just brighten up the colors and really give this a clean and professional polished look. Now we're ready to move on to our second grouping of flowers. This one is going to be in orange. Here I am starting with my dark just like I did with the pink, and I'm ink blending the large and medium flower with Persimmon. Once I finish with those, I'm going to move on to that small flower, and we're going to start with our light here, which is Peach Fizz, and ink blend a nice flat blend of that, and then move on to Clementine and ink blend a little gradation at the base. So this is very similar to how we did the pink flowers, but just in orange shades. Now we're on to stencil 2. Going to ink blend Peach Fuzz over the medium and a large flower, a nice flat blend over those flowers. When I finish with the Peach Fuzz, we're going to move on to the Clementine, and we're going to use that to create some gradations. I'm going to start with the large flower this time, and I'm going to ink blend the center and work my way out. I am once again trying to avoid the very center of my flower, and I can do that sort of by angling my blending tool so I have a smaller area of the sponge touching the paper, and that just kind of helps to have a little bit more control. Now we're going to move on to stencil number 3, and this time we're going to start with the Clementine, a nice flat base over all the openings with this medium shade. Once we finish with that, we're going to move on to our darkest shade, which is Persimmon, and ink blend some gradations starting at the base on the small and medium flower, and then ink blend at the center, working my way out a little bit. And again, avoiding the very center because I want to Copic color that later. I went ahead and did all the leaves, just finishing up the last layer for the leaves because the leaves are exactly the same on the orange flowers as they are on the pink. Now we're going to color that center real quick with the same Copic marker, which is R05. And now we're going to stamp in detail black just like we did before, and stamp those flowers, and they'll be nice and clean and crisp and ready for us to die cut out. I'm going to use the Wonderful in Every Way die set. Going to grab that large die, center it over my stamped image, and then run it through my die cutting machine. I repeated that process for both flowers, and we're left with these beautiful lacy die cuts. I love how the die cuts out all those negative spaces, just leaves this beautiful floral image. Now we're going to work on our background. I have an A2 top folding white card base. I'm going to ink blend the lower left corner in Peach Fuzz. Going to create a gradation here, so making it darker in the corner and then lighter as I work my way out towards the center. Then I'm going to move on to the upper right corner, and we're going to start with Ballet Slipper and ink blend a gradation with that as well. Ballet Slipper is very, very light though, much lighter than the Peach Fuzz. So I'm going to go over it with a little bit of bubble gum just to kind of make it a little bit more pink. I did tap off some of my excess ink onto some scrap paper because again, I want to make this blend as smooth and seamless as possible. Now that we finished with bubblegum, we're going to add some splatters. I just have some piece of acetate here. I'm going to take Clementine ink, press it onto my acetate, and then spray some water over that ink. Then grab a paintbrush and mix that ink and water together. So now we have this watered down ink. Load my brush up with it and tap my finger over the brush, and that will release a nice fine splattering of this ink. And I'm doing it over that orange corner of my card front. Now I'm just going to clean up here, and we're going to do this with a pink. We're going to use bubble gum here, just press it out onto the acetate. Then I will spritz it with some water, grab my paintbrush, mix the water and the ink together, load my brush up with that watered down ink, and then just tap my finger over my brush to release a fine splattering of that pink ink over that pink corner of my card front. Once I finish with that, we're going to move on to some gold watercolor. I have this Gonzai Tombi watercolor set here. I've grabbed a gold and I've added some water to it, mixed the gold paint and the water together, and now I'm going to load my brush over that paint and then just tap my finger over the brush to release some of the, to create some gold splatters on this card front as well. We are going to actually create a gold sentiment, so this will kind of incorporate the gold in the sentiment. I've grabbed a sentiment from the Wonderful in Every Way stamp set, and I'm going to stamp it onto some black cardstock. So I've got a little scrap in here. I am going to heat emboss, so I did apply some anti-static powder. I'm going to ink up my sentiment in Versamark ink, which is an embossing watermark ink. Dip it into some gold embossing powder. I have some stray and powder, so I'm just going to clean it up with a brush. Then when I'm done with that, I'll of course heat set with my heat tool. I then trimmed this down with my paper trimmer to kind of create a little sentiment strip off camera, and now ready to kind of bring our whole card together. I'm going to arrange my flowers here. Once I get them in place, I'm going to grab a piece of my low-tack tape to hold them there on the card front, and then I'm going to flip it over and then grab a pair of long bladed scissors and just trim off any of that overhang. Once I finish with that, I'm going to carefully remove my flowers, keeping them taped together, and then grab some foam adhesive and start adding it to the backside of my flowers and leaves. Once I get that all kind of covered with foam adhesive, I'll then remove the backing, and then I will stick this down onto my card front. Once I get it in place, I then will remove that tape that's kind of holding everything together, and then we'll be ready for our sentiment. And I'm going to grab it here real quick. I did go ahead and already add some foam adhesive to the backside, and now I'm just using a T-ruler to help me get it nice and straight on my card front, and that will actually complete the card. I'll hold it to the camera here so you can get a good look at all the details in this card. I really love how this turned out. This is really a fun modern composition for florals, and this really could be done with any floral set that you have, and I just love incorporating a little bit of the ink color that we used in the flowers themselves in the background. It just kind of lends itself to a really easy formula for a fun and beautiful card. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.